Hi, I'm Mary Ann Miller, and today is September the 23rd, 2015. I'm at the home of William Nalu, who lives in Rochester Hills, Michigan, and we are talking about his experience as an immigrant. And Bill, you understand that we're videotaping this interview?
Absolutely.
And with your permission?
Yes. My honor.
Okay, great. Well, I'm really interested in your immigrant experience. Maybe we should start at the beginning. Maybe if you could tell me where you were born and just tell me your story.
Yeah. So my birthplace is Baghdad, Iraq. I'm born to two Christian Iraqi parents. I guess the story for me starts at 8 years old. My father walked in one day into our home and said to my mother that I've got the passports, the forged passports, and the paperwork, and tomorrow morning we are leaving. And what ended up happening is, and this is something that it may be difficult for people to see this on TV or to hear of immigrant stories, but let me submit to you that this is 100%. This is my life we're talking about. Anyway, at 8 years old, he walks in and he tells her that we're leaving tomorrow morning, and that we have basically about a carry-on luggage worth of clothing to take with us. Now you ask, why is that the case? Well, it's because you can't just sell your home and just take off. Because if you do, then they suspect that you're taking money outside the country. If they find out, you're essentially executed right at the airport at that point. If you're lucky. If not, you go to jail for the rest of your life. Anyway, so what ends up happening is my mother said, well, I'd like to say goodbye to my sisters, my brothers. She's the oldest of 10. And so he says to her, we can't say goodbye to them because if one of them says, no, please don't go, and the authorities find out about this, we end up at the airport and so what ended, imagine having to tell this to your wife as a husband. It's already difficult enough knowing that you've got to leave your birthplace. So imagine having to tell your wife at that point in time, and he did it out of love. He wasn't being difficult with her. He said to her, if you call, if you do so much as to pick up this phone, I'm going to take our three. I'm the oldest of three. I'm going to take our children, and we're going to go, and you may never see us again. And so my mother, basically, the next day we ended up leaving, not having told a soul about the fact that we were leaving.
Why was your father so motivated to make that escape?
Well, he was a journalist with an oil company, English-owned oil company. And so in 1973, Saddam Hussein, this is before anybody would have known, anybody on this side of the pond would have known about Saddam Hussein, was the vice president. And so Saddam Hussein at that point in time was making quite a bit of noise within the ruling party, which is the Ba'ath Party. And so the writing was on the wall, and the foreign investments that were being made in the country were slowly drying up, and people that were in the know could see that. And so one of my recollections, during that time was my father would say, say goodbye to your grandmother and your grandfather, and I have visions to this day of saying goodbye to them. He said, just they'll be back next week, so in case neighbors were hearing anything, they'll be back, and we'll see you guys next week. And they were going off to America and not coming back. We were either never going to see them again, or we would at some point in time reunite with them. And so anyway, sure enough, our paperwork came in, and we were fortunate enough to have an uncle that had left some years prior to that. My father's older brother had moved to Germany, and so we immigrated to Germany on April the 15th, 1973.
And how old were you then?
I would have been 8 years old.
Okay.
And so fast forward a little bit there, and get acclimated to the German language, learn fluent German in 3 months because there were no ESL classes. We were trailblazers at that. We were some of the first Middle Eastern immigrants in Germany, and so then spent 3 years there, and then moved to the United States in September of 1975.
And how was it that you came to the U.S.?
We had my grandparents were already citizens at that. They had already been here for maybe 5 or 6 years, I believe it was, and so we moved to Detroit and lived there for about 6 months' time. Interesting. I'd like to share an interesting story with you about the Detroit experience. So we moved to Detroit, and so my father, a couple months into our American experience, says to my sister and I. My sister and I are a year and a half apart, and so he says to us, he says, "Come here, you guys." He says, "Why am I hearing you guys speak German?" Because at that point in time, German was what we spoke around the house. And I said, "Well, where would we get to practice English?" He says, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, we have these ESL classes, English Second Language." He goes, yeah, I understand. "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, we have an Arabic teacher, and we speak Arabic all day long." He goes, "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, "Well, we have this teacher." He says, "Okay." He says, "Okay, forget it. So the next day, takes the day off, and we go in and we see the principal. He demands a meeting with the principal. And he says to the principal, he says, "Here's the deal." He says, "I want my kids out of this ESL class." And so this well-educated principal says to my father, he says, "Mr. Nalu, you don't understand." He says, "Let me explain to you. We need to ease these children into this. It can be difficult. We need." And my father says, "Excuse me, but I'm going to need to interrupt you here. You simply don't understand how children learn, and by default, how immigrants learn. Immigrants don't need ESL classes. My children went from Arabic to German in 3 months flat. They can learn English in 3 months flat." And so, of course, it's not a big deal. We were already ahead in the maths and the sciences. And so 2 or 3 months later, we're speaking fluent English. And I don't think I have an accent. Can you tell at all?
You don't have an accent to me.
And by the way, one of the reasons I don't is because I believe it's because we didn't have this crutch called English Second Language.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. What are some of the things that helped your family integrate into society when they came to Detroit?
I guess I've got to submit my father as that driving force in my life. For whatever reason, we were blessed. The three children are all educated. We're all productive. My brother and I are business partners. My sister is a teacher of 25 years. And I think one of the things that my father and my mother instilled in us, particularly my father, is that don't you ever dare come to me and tell me that you are a victim in any way, shape, or form. We gave up, in the midst of my father speaking, we gave up a very decent middle-class lifestyle in Baghdad. I mean, Iraq wasn't going to turn into what it has turned into, for decades. And there were plenty of parents that knew sort of what was coming for them. Plenty of Christians that knew what was coming, but they decided, why turn our lives upside down to go to this place that it may be better, it may be worse. We don't know. We just don't know. My father was really crystal clear that he was ready to sacrifice his entire future to come to a place where his children would be able to exercise freedom. And it sounds cliche. Like, what do you mean freedom? If you've lived around freedom, if you've lived free all of your life, you just don't understand. You don't understand how precious this thing is. And once it disappears, you can pretty much say goodbye to it for generations to come, if it ever comes back. And if you doubt that, I submit Cuba and North Korea and East Germany and how many other places on earth was there a situation where people had some semblance, some control over their lives, and bigger, better, more government came knocking on their door, and the rest is history.
So what you're telling me is your father, to a greater extent, and neighbors and people of that age to a lesser extent, realized the winds were changing. There was something ahead that was going to mean a loss of freedom. Are you talking about a loss of religious freedom or a loss of personal freedom?
Interesting you bring that up. My parents weren't particularly, even though we were born and raised in Catholicism, we really didn't spend a whole lot of time. I don't recall ever my father sitting us down, my mother sitting us down. My mother was clearly more religious, but the bigger part of that was that there was something that was going to trump religion, and that was that God gives us free will. I don't know how this... It's not like I can point to a time where they sat us down and said, well, there's this thing, called free will, and God gives us that and all that stuff. It was sort of through osmosis, through their action. I could see that you didn't need to go to church on Sundays in order for you to have a personal connection to this thing that we call God. And as we continue, you may find that there are... I have a more universalist outlook on that, and I find that the more I expand my outlook, the more I expand my view of what God is, the closer I get to what I think we could agree on, and that is that our Lord and Savior would be Jesus Christ. I have no problem with that statement, but I think He's so much bigger than anything we've made Him out to be so far.
Now, you said at that time Christians were in the minority. By how much? How much of a minority?
I would suspect they would be probably less than 5%.
Oh.
I don't have those figures exactly. There are other people that would be more qualified, but I think it would be safe to assume that 5% is probably around. It would be a safe estimation.
Okay, and in those times, in the early 1970s, were Christians able to practice their religion freely in Iraq?
If it means they're not burning down churches and hanging people at large, I guess we could call it that.
But
compared to today,
mm-hmm.
if you look at ISIS, for example, if that's religious intolerance, I guess you go back to 1973. I guess you'd say, well, you had it pretty lucky. We let you live. We let you live in a Muslim country, and so the question that has to be asked, the question that begs to be asked by Muslims, by Christians and Jews, is who lived on that land 1,450 years ago? Who was there? Who owned that land prior to Muhammad coming on the scene? I mean, there were Christians and Jews.
Right.
Even prior to Christians, Jews owned the land, and so that takes us into a whole other place.
Well, let me understand. What language did you speak?
Arabic.
Okay. Did you speak the language of the Christians of Iraq?
Well, my parents both continue to speak the Chaldean language,
which is
Chaldean,
similar to Aramaic?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. So we grew up in a household, and I can still understand Chaldean, but having had a first grade education and having only my mother to speak to, my father and I, my parting with my father's, with my father's conversations in Arabic, it started off right around the time I was about 15, 16 years old. Started taking auto mechanics, and I don't know how do you explain some parts of a vehicle in Chaldean and Arabic? I don't have that. And so that was pretty clear. We were going to start speaking English as a whole mm-hmm. at that point. So what little Arabic I still retain over the years, I get to speak that with my mother. And
so now, when you speak to your parents, do you speak in English or a combination?
It really depends on it. There's times when I can't articulate an idea, and so I've got to say it in English. And my mother, God bless her heart, she really understands a lot more English than she lets on. She has she has great conversation in English. But the Arabic language, I mean, let's face it, at that time in 1975 they would have been, I'm 11, Ed 27, 28 years, so they were in their late 30s. There's a critical time in which an adult, you can be. My father is about as American as you'll never. I don't know if you'll ever meet anybody he's not a flag waver. This is a different kind of a person. This is a person. I'll tell you a funny story about this here. One time, this is during the Gulf War. We're sitting there in the living room, and we had just started bombing Baghdad and eliminating some of the infrastructure in order to be able to debilitate Saddam's forces. So my grandmother's watching this, and she says, "Oh my God, what are they doing to my country? Look what they're doing to my country." And my father, he's talking to his mother at this point, and he says to her, "What do you mean your country? This is your country. If you don't like it, I'll buy you a ticket back home." And this is not what she meant to say, but this is sort of how he This is sort of how seriously he takes this thing. When you come to America, there's room for dissension. We can talk about how, you can have your own ideas about what an American is, but let's not confuse the issue here. Let's not pretend that America is in any way, shape, or form the worst at anything out there. I submit to you that it's the best in every single category you could list at this point in time. And for you and I, we're preaching to the choir. It's easy for us to have a conversation. But I would challenge anybody born here or elsewhere to explain to me how America has somehow made the world worse in some way, shape, or form than some other countries out there.
So does your father call himself an American, a Chaldean American, Iraqi American?
He's about as unhyphenated as they come. No. Yeah, I carry that into this generation. I'm always fascinated by somebody who says, well, wow, what a wonderful story you have as a Chaldean American. And I say to them, why do we need to add that? And if we're going to add that distinction, let's add that at the end. Let's say that this person is an American with Chaldean heritage. Let's say that this person is an American with African heritage. Let's say this person's an American with German heritage. And it's not a small thing. It's not a small thing to distinguish. America is in the state that it's in largely because we've allowed the left to be able to break us apart in ethnic ways and in socioeconomic ways and racial ways. What is that all about? Well, it's simple. It's the formula for tyranny. Every single country that has ever gone from being a democracy to becoming a theocracy or a communist nation, every single one of them starts pitting one subset of the population against the other. I mean, is there any doubt here? I mean, can you think of a single country that hasn't followed that formula?
No, that seems to be the formula.
And we're headed in that direction, and we've got half of the country that's sitting in the wagon that's saying we need more, bigger, better, more government, and the other half that's pushing the wagon saying I don't know if I can take any more of this here. My back is really starting to hurt. I don't know how long it'll be before I jump in the wagon with you. So at what point does the wagon stop moving?
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Bill. If you were one of the earliest refugees from Iraq, there have been refugees coming, in a stream ever since that time. So are you acquainted with other Iraqi refugees that have come later than you?
Yes. The Christian minority has been migrating here for decades now. Mm-hmm. My issue isn't so much with immigration, although let me finish this point first, and then I'll come back to the immigration thing here. So we've been immigrating folks for hundreds of years. Where we have jumped off of the proverbial cliff at this point is when we started to subsidize somebody coming here, and it's really important for me to make this point because when we came to Detroit, my father was looking for work, any work. This was a journalist making a really decent living back in the old country. When he came here, he was literally begging for, and he was a calligrapher also by trade. So he was, at that point in time, he was not too proud to paint like 3 Faygo, 3 for $1 signs for party stores. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine the pride you have to swallow to come here and to say, well, even that, I'll do whatever it takes. If my children have if I can bestow on them this dream of America, I'm willing to do anything. And so he was almost broken at that point in time. And what I say by that is that wasn't enough money to feed the family. And so at that point in time, there were 2 options. One is you go on public assistance, and the other one is to move back to Baghdad. And we were 2 weeks away, as God is my witness. We were 2 weeks away from moving back to the old country. I mean, he just thought, you know what? I guess I was wrong. It's the land of opportunity, but nobody will give me an opportunity. And I don't want a handout. Because I know what's involved. I know that no government ever hands somebody over something without wanting something in return. And that's the beginning. To me, it's a parasite. It's spiritually based. It's wrong for the giver and it's wrong for the taker. But it's a lot easier for the taker. If that taker is starving to death, they're going to they're going to do whatever it takes to feed their family.
Well,
Including robbing a bank, by the way, including criminal activity. But when you have a government that says, well, you know what, we don't think it's enough that America has been the beacon of democracy and opportunity, now we're going to throw $700 a month at you. So how long, who says no, to that? It's difficult. I don't know if I could. I knock on wood, we've never had to accept public assistance. We've never, ever had to do any of that. And I'm proud to say, but who am I to judge somebody who says, it's easy for you, your father gave up much to make sure that you become educated, that you all have college educations, and that you've made something of yourself. Congratulations, God bless you for that. We weren't so fortunate. We came later than you. We weren't 11 when we came here. There cases can be made. Why?
What changed things for your father? What kept him from having to go back to Baghdad?
There was he was hired by a Tasty Bread in Detroit. Just as fate would have it, just at the last minute, somebody said, well, you know what? And so he worked at Tasty Bread for, God, I don't know how many years, 5, 6, 7 years or something like that. Just worked his tail off. I have really, really fond memories. I wouldn't give up those heartaches for anything in the world. One of the reasons that I can dig so deep, one of the reasons that my brother and I, when we opened up our business, we worked for a year and a half. We were shell dealers. We worked for a year and a half, 7 days a week, 18 to 20-hour work days. We skipped weddings. We skipped birthday parties. We had no other choice. We didn't have a backup plan. My father had co-signed for us. And so we didn't have a backup plan. So when you don't have any other option but to succeed, lo and behold, the human spirit comes through. Throughout humanity, throughout history, when all odds are against you, but all you've got is the sweat equity that you're going to put into it. Somehow, if you can't do it on your own, somebody comes along and says, I used to be like that, but I've forgotten. I have forgotten what it's like for somebody to really pick themselves up by the bootstraps. We weren't ashamed. We didn't embarrass people that picked themselves up by the bootstraps. Does that remind you of a certain Ben Carson? So anyway, so to get back to the story, I remember when we lived in Detroit, one of the things that the immigrant experience is different from the rest of the population in Detroit. This is how parasitic that relationship is. Once you start accepting Uncle Sam's goodies, what that does to your soul. I'm not even exaggerating when I say it breaks you as a human being. It destroys your initiative. We talked about initiative here just a little while ago. But one of the things I remember was after a 16-hour shift at Tasty Bread, my father would come home, and my mother, she's a house manager at this point. And so it'd come home, and at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm hearing typewriters going, and he's dictating to her in Arabic, from English to Arabic. And so what they were doing is he was translating owner's manuals for General Motors and Ford and what have you, whoever needed the services. And he would be translating, dictating to her, and she's typing away. She was a bank clerk back in the old country. And this is going on until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So then he goes to bed, gets up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning to do this all over again. Well, as fate would have it, in 6 months' time, we had built up enough of a nest egg to move to Oak Park. And what a wonderful neighborhood that was. It was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. That I was one of the first Middle Eastern kids that was in the Oak Park School District, and it was just a fantastic melting pot. We had Jewish friends, and then we had African American folks that lived in Royal Oak Township. Some of them would get bused, some of them lived in Oak Park. But what I learned about that was that if you're coming from a place of integrity, if you speak your truth, but you're soothing it with kindness and compassion, that people are willing to understand where you're coming from. As long as there's room for everybody to express their opinion, and nobody was going to be castigated for it, and we weren't going to make people bad for having their own opinions. And as it turned out, there was a lot of politically incorrect things that kids are going to say to each other. And so one of the things that I'm not ashamed to share here is, as a Middle Eastern, person, we all know what the derogatory term is that would so I had African American friends, and this is not a racist thing to say, by the way. Mm-hmm. To me, to be a racist is a heck of a lot more than what people say and discuss. To me, I want to see what kind of a human being you are. There are some serious racists out there. This does not meet that category. So anyway, so we would be joking about this, and there would be times when there would be this moment where I would be referred to as a sand N-word. And I thought to myself, here I have a black friend of mine referring to me as that. And so, I guess, what is there to learn from that? I guess I carry that into my adulthood, and I realize that we all say silly things. There's times when we say things that we're probably a little ashamed of. But you know what? It would benefit us if we accept. I want to hear what's in your heart. I'm not interested in what you tell me you think about me. I really am interested in what you think I represent to you. So if there's a problem with immigration, if there's a problem with whatever, we might want to discuss that, because you might find that I have the same ideas about what we've done to immigration as you do. And so that's sort of where we're at. And so where that leads me here is I have really, really great conversations with customers, with friends. You can think to yourself, oh my God, you can go there? Absolutely you can go there, because as long as respectful individuals can have a conversation about what really is driving poverty in the inner city, what really has destroyed immigration to the point where I'm here to submit to you that we've broken immigration to the point where I don't think we need to stop all immigration right now until we get it right, until we get back to why immigration worked in the past.
And tell me how you think would be the best way. If you could design the program, how would you design it?
The first place to appeal to is you've got to appeal to the native immigrants that have already been here, that have already made something of themselves. So if we're talking, for example, about Hispanic Americans, if we're talking about Hispanic Americans, you want to appeal to local business leaders, politicians, and you want to be able to, not just with Hispanics, but with Middle Easterners and all of these populations, to say, do you not see that we are bringing folks over and not expecting them to assimilate? And I'm not suggesting that people need to give up their religion. All I'm asking for, and this is not a small thing to ask for, but guess what? The greatest country on earth doesn't have to beg for immigrants from all around the world that don't. We're kind of the top of the hill. We're kind of the top of the mountain at this point here. So why is it that we somehow are unable to make a case for America? That is, if you come to America, we expect you to abide by the Pledge of Allegiance. We expect your citizenship to override your religion. That's not a small thing for some people to do. I'm not saying God is more important. I'm talking about your religion. So I don't think we are any more comfortable with a right-wing extremist Christian organization that is willing to deport people at will and do the kinds of things that ISIS does in the name of Islam. I don't think anybody is suggesting that. Have you heard of a single Christian suggesting that, or a single Jew suggesting that, or a single Hindu suggesting that? I think we need to get this right. I think we need to have a new contract with America, and it has to be one centered around the Declaration of Independence, and that piece of paper has to be more important to you than the Bible, than the Quran, than the Torah. And if it's not, then I have to say, well, in the places where it's not compatible here, what do you do? I mean, what are you willing to do? If you are, let's say, a fundamentalist Christian, for example, And if the Bible is, if you see it through this sort of the same window that a Muslim fundamentalist would say it, what are you prepared to do to somebody who doesn't agree with the Bible? How far are we willing to go? And that's a slippery slope. Because there's just no room. Who decides that, by the way? How many Christians does it take to say, okay, we're going to deport what? Gay Americans? What? Muslim Americans? I'm not prepared to do that. For me, the litmus test is very simple. If you want to assimilate into the idea that is America, and I don't have a list that I can give you today, but I've got a few things here. For example, we don't subscribe to an adult marrying a 14-year-old. That's we see adulthood as being 18. At some point in time, I think we need to discuss that. I'm not necessarily married to the age here. My point is there are certain things. The Chaldean culture, for example, arranged marriages. Okay, that is something to me. So here I'll call out the Catholic tradition. This is how I suppose Italians did it and Irish did it. At 14, 15 years old, they're going to marry off, and it's an arranged marriage. We move on from there. That's all fine and dandy if you live in Ireland or you live in Baghdad or you live in pick your country. It's a different story when you come to America and now this 14, 15-year-old doesn't want to marry somebody twice her age or 3 times her age, or maybe he's her age but she just doesn't like him. Well, what do you plan on doing with that? This is a human being, and it's an American who's exercising their right to control their life. Now you could say, well, she's 14 years old, she's a minor, parents still, have control. Does that include marrying her off? We have to have this conversation. And in some religions, we can't have this conversation. There are some parts of religion where, in our faith, where some folks believe that, you can't operate. We can't interfere with God's, if we're not going to give them antibiotics, we're not going to give them, we're not going to, if there's some health problem, we're going to let God handle that. So we're not going to let God interfere with that. Okay, but as a society, where do we go with that? Again, I'm asking the question here. I'm not suggesting I have the answer, but in a society like the United States of America, in a Western civilization, we at least have the ability to ask some questions. And by the way, that means offending each other. That means going to places where we can offend each other here. What's not allowed is for you to silence me or me to silence you, because even if I can prove to you that I'm correct, you and I can have a conversation about the devastation that drugs are. Okay? I've never taken any drugs in my life. And I would probably bet my right arm that you've never taken any drugs in your life. But the fact of the matter is, if we can't have an intelligent conversation about how we can't legislate morality, that God's will is free will, that you can have laws, doesn't mean you're not going to have people doing drugs. The fact of the matter, at some point in time, the human being has to understand that God gives you free will, and that that there are consequences, just like gravity. You jump out of a window, you're going to fall. There's no getting around that. God's law says that if you do this, there's a consequence to that. And so if we want to have a conversation about how I should be able to do this or that, I have no say in the matter. I can counsel you, I can show you evidence, but at some point in time, you're going to decide for yourself what is right for you.
Mm-hmm. Now, Bill, let me ask you this. How old were you when you got your American citizenship, your U.S. citizenship?
Well, I was 11 when we came to America, mm-hmm. So that would have been at 16.
At 16. Yeah. And what did it mean to you at age 16? Do you remember the day? Do you remember the occasion?
I remember us going downtown to the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and I remember taking a fairly substantial test in citizenry. having the, understanding, who your representatives are, knowing, who the president is, who the vice president is. God forbid you might want to know who the secretary of state is. Nothing like what we find today. It wasn't a dumbed down version. Not everybody got participation medals walking in. Let's put it that way. So here's an interesting story that I can share with you. Right around my 16th year. So on right around my 16th birthday, I had expressed to my friends in the 10th grade that I was going to go find a car. I was going to buy a car that day. I was coming home with a car. So my friends knew me as the jumper, the passionate one that I am. And they said, no, I wouldn't bank on it. You might not. I said, I'm promising you guys, I am going to come home with the vehicle that evening. And so you just give me a second to expand on this, because it has something to do with what it means to be an American. So anyway, so we head off across town from Oak Park to what is now East Point. And so we go and we see this dealership, and there's your quintessential used car salesman. I mean, just as slick as can be, And so we go there, and brown happens to be my least favorite color. Just brown just seems like, I don't know, it's just so as it turns out, there's a brown Ford Pinto and a brown Dodge Dart, both of them rusting away, just literally staring at them, things are falling off the cars. Mm-hmm. So they were both $1,500 cars, and so we sit there and so I do what any wise 16-year-old does. I pick the two-door. And so we sit in the finance, in front of this man's table, and as we're discussing this, my father leans over and he says to me in Arabic, he says, son, I don't know cars. I'm not a car guy, but I know people, and I can't trust this man to save my. And I said, whoa, time out. What are you doing here? He says to me, I'm trying to talk to you about the car. I said, what happened to the conversation about I could be a man at 16, and I could be a man? You told me to save some money. I've got $500, and you're going to be making some of these decisions for yourself. And he says, and so what are you saying? I said, well, I'm ready to make a decision. He says, you are? I said, yeah. He says, well, hell, then let's sign. And so I put my signature on there, and he co-signs for the rest of the $1,500. And as fate would have it, the car broke down 2 miles away from my house. And what's my point about this? The wisdom that this man had to let me figure it out for myself, to let me jump in the water close enough to where he could come and save me. And so, as it turned out, that was one of the biggest blessings of my life, because that prompted me having to take on mechanics in high school. It's the reason why we're sitting in this home that we're sitting in today. It's the reason why I'm a small business owner. It's by and large the reason why I consider myself a libertarian conservative. There's nothing more important than having a parent provide a child with a direct reflection of what personal responsibility is. And I'll give you just one more story here. My wife and my wife's a social worker, and we're real big on empowering not just our children, but empowering. I mean, this is what I'm doing. What are we doing here today? We're trying to empower America. We're trying to wake America up to how it was built, right? So we sit in this parenting lecture, and this woman said, "Give me some positive attributes that you would want your children to have by the time they become adults." And so she has this whiteboard, and if we start writing, okay? So honest, dependable, trustworthy, kind, loving, okay? So we've got, 50 of these things up on the screen. So then she said, let's whittle it down to one thing. If you could find one thing, if you would want to bestow one thing on your children, what would that be? And I'll make it easy for you. It's more important than loving. What do you suppose ranked higher than a loving child, a loving adult? What would rank even higher than that? Independent. Because nobody wants a 30-year-old, overweight, Diet Pepsi sucking adult living in their basement playing video games all day long. It's a crime. I mean, it's literally a crime to not ask of a human being, much less one that you brought into this world, to make them a helpless human being. And so that's sort of how I come at this. Is I don't dare ever consider myself a victim, and if I do, it's for about 5 minutes. You know, I'll have my complaints, but I get up in the morning and I say, but you're still an American. You still get to have a debate with people, and no matter what they say about what George Bush did in Iraq, and no matter what we did to Native Americans, or what how we imported black slaves 200 plus years ago, the fact of the matter is, nowhere on earth does a minority person have a better chance for a life than here. That's just a fact. There's not even a debate in that. I don't know how would you even begin to debate that? Tell me that Africans in Africa have a better life than Africans in America? I have a friend of mine that will tell you that, who is an immigrant from Africa. So it's how we got to this point. It's real simple. It's not the immigration problem. It's the open door policy that would allow for such dysfunction. That's the problem here.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Bill. It must be in some ways kind of a difficult road to take. You're a very successful man. You've had a lot of life experiences. You've got children that are growing up into adulthood. How have you navigated the waters with those children to bring them to the standard of independence that you?
It's more difficult because they can't have the same reference point that I do. They live in a world where we're living in Oakland County. By any measure, we're living in one of the best counties on earth. Not in the United States of America. We're in one of the best counties on earth, and it's difficult. There's a disconnect. They hear stories about what Grandpa and Grandma did. They hear stories on my wife's side of the family, of what it was like during the Depression, how deep that generation dug. And I don't think there's no substitute for experience. You and I can talk about what it feels like to jump. You can become a PhD in swimming and never have jumped into water. Mm-hmm. Because we can talk about swim techniques and all so forth, but unless you've jumped in the water and feel what it's like to have water on your skin, what it's like to get water in your lungs, and what it feels like to choke on the water, how it's like, what is that? How can you substitute experience? And so you just can't. And so I relegate myself to debriefing them. They come back from school. And so we have to undo some of the damage that's done. We have to supplement what's missing from history books nowadays. And the outright lies that are in there. We have to call it out for what it is. And we have to use real life examples in economics to show them how this is not just a crime against people who are paying into the system by virtue of taxes, but it's even a bigger crime for those that are being kept in a dependency role. That is the farthest thing. I lean pretty heavily on. There's an author named Neil Donald Walsh, and he has a trilogy of books called Conversations with God. I don't know if you're familiar with those works, but it's an amazing piece of literature, and in this one of the things that he says is that, and where I come at it with this is America is betraying itself in allowing for this to happen. And so where does this come from? And I submit that it comes from basically white guilt. And that is that somehow we're going to make up for all of the things that we did to Native Americans, to African Americans. We're going to somehow make up for it. Well, you think that making up for it, you think providing somebody with a welfare check is that? You think that that's the way it's basically economic slavery. You're doing nothing more than continuing what you say you've been doing all along. And all a human beings ever asked is just to, what did Dr. King ask for? He said, just treat us the same. Give us the same opportunity that you've had all along. And I went to school with black friends. I know successful. I mean, this, like as if we need to. It's silly to even bring this up. But let's make this thing really elementary here. Do we really think that Black America is missing anything that we have? Like what? Intelligence, wisdom, work ethic? I don't believe any of that stuff. None of that stuff. So the fact of the matter is we've industrialized welfare. Welfare has become a voting bloc for the Democrat Party. By the way, and let's call ourselves out, as conservatives, the moderate part of the Republican Party, what was their subset of the population? The military and farm subsidies and so forth. And so there's plenty of blame to go around. And I think the one way we can separate what we believe to be, whether we're Tea Party, whether we're libertarians, I think clearly government has gotten too big. This monstrosity, and if anybody doubts that, let's just take one example here. Why do you need 75,000 pages in order to explain to me what I owe you for taxes at the end of the year? And how can I possibly hire somebody to keep up with that? So if you really wanted to catch somebody breaking the laws, who do you hire? Who is qualified to know 75,000? I mean, the Bible isn't that big. I mean, scholars, we're killing each other over religion, right? This is bigger than the Bible. And that's what it takes to figure out what we owe the government. And every year it gets bigger and bigger. And we pretend, by the way, that we're going to reduce your taxes. And we both, both aisles both aisles do this. We're going to reduce your taxes. Meanwhile, we're going to print more money. Because, I am this small government guy. Well, show me. What I need you to do is I need you to cut about 90% of the government out. And by the way, when I say cut it out, I'm not saying chop it off and have it go nowhere. Give it back to the states where it belongs. Because the only thing we ever ask of Uncle Sam is just to protect us from foreign threat. All other rules and regulations were supposed to be left to the state. And look what we've created.
Now, Bill, your views on immigration, that it's a broken system and it needs to start almost from the ground up. And then you talked about nothing substitutes for experience. So that would tell me you'd almost have to go through the immigration experience to be the best judge of how to fix it, or pretty close to it. There'd have to at least be that input. So when you talk to other immigrants, friends of yours, people who've had maybe similar experiences to yours, are they on the same page with you?
I think philosophically speaking, they would tell you, they would say, and I would say, yeah, they would be in agreement. But here's where the rub is on this. The problem is, while they're in agreement that that we should be more selective in our immigration, the problem is they're being offered goodies. These immigrants are being offered goodies, and this is unlike anything that we ever came across. There's no, I don't know how other way you can put this. We're buying immigrants for votes. And by the way, we're using Catholic churches, we're using synagogues to bring people in. So it's one thing to bring people in that might be able to add to. So we have a skilled labor force problem, right? So I think we might be able to, if any country can ask, shouldn't we be asking for the brightest minds to come to America to add to it? We have enough unskilled labor, right? I mean, we're complaining about how there's not enough, jobs out there. So why are we bringing more people in that are at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale when we don't have to do that. If we had to do that, that would be one thing. But if we don't have to do that, and if, by the way, in doing so, if it's actually watering down what it means to be an American, if we're forgetting assimilation, if we don't care, if we're making this thing a completely different thing than what our forefathers intended, that's treason. What would you call it other than treason? It should be criminal. It should be criminal to ingratiate yourself or your political party to buy votes. And we don't have to blame immigrants for that. We could talk about how we went off the gold standard. We can talk about how we printed $18 trillion of debt. And there was a time in my ignorance that I thought to myself, well, surely, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I don't know when I had this first thought, I thought to myself, I'm not having, and I surely wasn't the only one who was thinking this. I thought, man, alive. 10 trillion, 12 trillion. At what point does China come and get their money? At what point does Saudi Arabia say, you know what, we're going to turn in all this worthless money, we want some hard goods? At what point do we say, sorry, all we have is dollars? What happens at that point in time? Why are we paying into a system? Why is it that our homes get taken away, our cars get taken away if we miss a payment? We've been missing a payment for how many years now? And they get to tell us how we should bring more immigrants into America? Well, please, let me explain it to you. I'm an immigrant. Stop. This isn't required of us as Americans. Enough already. Once we get it corrected, fine. Then we'll bring people in that our country needs. We have plenty of jobs. We're the greatest job-creating country the world has ever seen. Is there any doubt about that? So we use our ingenuity to create all kinds of jobs. But we don't have enough jobs to provide for folks that can't speak the language, that don't want to speak the language. There's the other part of that, is we have enclaves of immigrants that come in that don't need to speak the language. They stay within their respective, they'll work, and there's nothing wrong with that if you start off doing that. There are plenty of Chaldean Americans that didn't want to speak Arabic and the English, and they worked in back rooms in places and so forth. That's sort of what you do, and Italian Americans did this, and German Americans did that. But at some point in time, your kids are going to go to school, and you're going to need to learn the language, and you're going to need to explain to them something about American history. Otherwise, your kids, and I don't say this disrespectfully, by the way, otherwise your kids grow up and say, well, my father and my mother, they're just boaters, And my parents never wanted to be about that. They came here, understood what they were giving up, and they were absolutely willing to do that, because being an American doesn't mean you have to leave your culture behind. But it means that you need to take on a different idea, there's a different way we do things that's different than any other country. I don't even know how to explain it at this point. There's something about this greatest country on earth that is different than anywhere else. And I don't know how to explain it unless maybe you've served overseas, or you've lived overseas and you see what it's like. I mean, my daughter and I, in her German class, went, and we went to visit Germany. We were in Paris. The food, just talking about how what an amazing country we've created. How the abundance, just an abundance. The cars we drive, the amount of food on shelves. 17 different deodorants. I'm sorry, Mr. Sanders. I'm sorry. I know you don't want 17. I do. I want 17 deodorants. I don't use 17, but I'd like to have the choice in the matter. You can't, if you don't get it, you just don't get it. And it's not something to apologize for. It's not for us to apologize for. We're wasteful. I'll submit to you, we can be wasteful. But it's not something to apologize for. Yeah, we can correct that. We can explain to somebody who maybe uses too much electricity or too much water we say, you know what, we're it's not a finite resource. We need to be conservative in that respect also. But the fact of the matter is, you don't let some other country take the moral high ground and lecture to you about, I don't know, women's rights and minorities and ethnic integration. Where's there another country that's going to lecture to me as an American about opportunity?
Let me ask you one final question that I hope can wrap up what we've talked about here tonight. How would you describe a patriotic American?
Oh God, yeah. My wife and I went to. Notice I can't just answer the question. We got to have a story. I love stories.
Your stories are great.
Well, my wife and I went to Arizona about 10 years ago. I was visiting a friend, and we walked into this Native American store, and I saw a quote. It's one of. If I had one quote, if I were to go to jail for the rest of my life, I just want, this is my keepsake. If I go on Survivor, I want that with me. And it's a Native American proverb, and it goes like this. It goes, "We do not inherit this earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children." We do not inherit this earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And I think of all the ways that this applies. I mean, clearly, Native Americans had a particular fondness for nature and living in balance with nature. But I think about all the other ways that this thing applies. Fiscally speaking, look what we've done. 18 trillion and counting. Okay? We steal money from our grandchildren and from our great-great-grandchildren, but we pretend like it's no big deal. And you ask a liberal, you say to them, but what about, you believe in stealing? They say, well, no, absolutely not. Well, it's okay for me to steal from billionaires and millionaires. Okay, but we're stealing from your children and your grandchildren. Well, we're probably not going to pay this money off at some point in time, because we're not the greatest country in the world anymore, but at least we're the best of the worst right now. And there's some truth to that. We are no longer the greatest country the way we knew it, but we're just not as pitiful as the rest of the world. And so that's why they still invest in America. That's why the money's still here, for now, until we run out of billionaires' monies and millionaires' monies. So anyway, so politically speaking, what are we going to give them? I am not going to be in the same position that my parents were. I am not going to be moving my children to another country. That will not happen. I'm going to hand them over a country that was handed to me. I'm planning on going backwards. We need to reconnect with what it means to be an American. And if it takes an immigrant to remind native-born Americans what Americans are, how pitiful is that? That you need an immigrant to remind us? But you know what? Sign me up. Sign me up. That's my mission. My job is to be the best husband I can be, the best father I can be, and to provide a service for my customers and to be the best small business owner I can be. My mission in life is to be the best American I can be. And by the way, I'm not excluding the rest of the world. All I'm saying is that being a great American, by default, means that you're going to create a better world. Because there's nothing that we do that's incongruent with, nothing that we do for us that's good, that doesn't automatically transfer to the rest of the world.
Well, thank you very much,
Thank
Bill.
you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.